Rome, 1647. The streets were silent under a heavy shroud of fear, the cobblestones echoing faint whispers of dread as nightfall swallowed the city. Shadows clung to every corner, curling around the walls of ancient buildings like living entities, moving with a deliberate, almost predatory awareness. In one secluded monastery, far from the eyes of the devout and the curious, a monk labored tirelessly, his hands stained with paint that was not merely color but a shade darkened by obsession and an unsettling intimacy with the macabre. Known as the condemned monk, he carried a name that resonated in fearful murmurs, a name whispered among the fearful citizens of Rome, as if speaking it aloud might summon the horror itself. His eyes glimmered with a strange, unnerving intensity, burning with a mix of genius, madness, and something far more sinister. On that night, the Vatican's oldest canvas was revealed from its dusty concealment, and it bore the weight of a transformation so grotesque it defied comprehension. What was meant to depict a sacred scene had been reborn into a chilling vision drenched in the hue of blood, a vivid, horrifying mirror of human suffering. Each face in the Last Supper, each hand, every shadow, seemed imbued with an unnatural life, a presence that unsettled anyone who dared observe too closely. The monk's brush moved with deliberate precision, guided by an obsession that surpassed mere devotion, each stroke an echo of his own inner torment projected outward onto the canvas. Rumors swirled in the city's alleyways, tales of a man possessed by ghosts, haunted by sins too dark to name, driven to create a work that was part confession, part curse. Shadows in the chamber seemed to answer his movements, twisting and bending, almost breathing with the rhythm of his strokes. Candlelight flickered violently, casting grotesque moving shapes on the walls, as if the room itself were aware of the horror being conjured. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of wax, paint, and something more elusive, more disturbing, an essence of dread that pressed on the mind and heart alike. Hours passed, then days as the monk labored, the painting growing ever more grotesque, faces twisted in agony, hands clawing toward a heaven that offered no mercy. Some say the monk mixed his own blood into the pigments, sealing his own torment into the work itself, leaving a permanent imprint of suffering within the strokes. As completion approached, the intensity of the chamber became unbearable, a tangible weight pressing down on the few who dared approach. When the final stroke was applied, the monk retreated into the deepest corner of the chapel, locking himself away from the world, never to emerge. His obsession, his depravity, and the haunting vision he had wrought became inseparable, fused into the canvas itself, which remained behind as a silent, oppressive witness to his existence and his descent. Later, those who glimpsed the painting reported a suffocating sense of fear, an invisible presence pressing against their minds, leaving them shaken for days, sometimes weeks. The artwork itself, hidden in the Vatican's archives, remained untouched, a dark relic of a man consumed entirely by his inner demons. The city of Rome seemed to absorb the horror emanating from this chamber, the whispers of the monk's deeds lingering in the air, infecting the imagination of anyone who dared speak of them. This introduction, Part 1, is merely the opening of a tale drenched in darkness, a glimpse into an obsession that merged artistry with madness, leaving behind questions that no human mind could fully comprehend, and a terror that refuses to fade. Each moment in the monk's chamber seemed suspended in time, every brushstroke a testament to a mind unhinged, a devotion corrupted into horror, a vision that would forever haunt the annals of history. The monk's isolation became a prison of his own making, walls closing in as his mind spiraled deeper into obsession. The candlelight flickered constantly, shadows twisting and writhing like living entities, echoing the torment that consumed him from within. His vision of the Last Supper was no longer a painting but a vessel, a conduit through which his anguish, his depravity, and his haunting imaginings were poured into the world. Each figure on the canvas seemed to breathe, eyes hollow yet full of life, hands stretched in gestures of despair and accusation, the macabre energy emanating from the pigments as if infused with the monk's very essence. Rumors began to spread beyond the monastery, whispered among the city's denizens, stories of a cursed work that drew darkness into the room and left an oppressive weight on any who lingered near it. Scholars and priests alike approached the chamber, curiosity battling instinctive dread, only to retreat with pale faces and trembling hands, recounting tales of the air itself feeling alive, oppressive, heavy with whispers of sins long past. Night after night the monk returned to his work, consumed by visions that no mortal eye should behold, his mind unraveling as he traced every line with meticulous care. Driven by a force that seemed both divine and malevolent, The very walls seemed to absorb his presence, the chamber exhaling a palpable unease that seeped into Rome's streets through rumors and silent dread. As the painting neared completion, it became apparent that this was not a mere artistic expression, but a chronicle of obsession, a testament to what can happen when a mind surrenders to its darkest impulses. The monk's own physical form began to mirror the horror he created. Gaunt features, sunken eyes, trembling hands, and a pallor that suggested more than mere fasting. A complete surrender to the torment of creation and the unrelenting weight of his own inner demons. When finally the work was finished, a silence unlike any other descended upon the chamber, as if the very air recognized the gravity of what had been wrought. The monk vanished afterward, disappearing into the folds of Rome, leaving the painting behind as the only witness to his existence and the horrors that had consumed him. Those who later encountered the canvas reported a sense of time distortion, a suffocating atmosphere that clung to the skin and mind, a feeling that reality itself had been warped by the monk's obsession. The painting remained hidden, preserved in secrecy, yet its infamy grew as stories seeped through the city's streets, whispered warnings to those curious enough to seek out what should have remained unseen. It was said that the blood, both figurative and literal, imbued into the work, carried a resonance, a lingering aura of the monk's anguish that no rational explanation could dispel. The Last Supper, reimagined through the monk's tormented lens, became a study not of divine grace but of human frailty, of obsession and darkness that can consume even the most disciplined mind. Each figure's expression conveyed not just suffering, but a reflection of the monk's inner turmoil, his fears, desires, and a haunting despair, encapsulated in the strokes of his brush and the mix of pigment and blood that made the images unnervingly alive. The room itself, now a repository of dread, whispered stories in silence, an unbroken chain of fear that spread beyond the monastery walls, reaching into the hearts of all who heard its tale. To this day, the chamber remains untouched, the painting hidden yet palpable, a macabre testament to what happens when genius and madness collide, when devotion crosses into obsession, and when a single human mind is allowed to dwell entirely within its own darkest imaginings. The monk's disappearance became as legendary as his creation, a perfect mirror to the horrors he had painted, leaving Rome haunted not only by the physical work he left behind, but by the shadows of his mind, forever echoing in the city's memory. The terror that began in the flickering candlelight of a secluded chamber thus continues to ripple across time, an enduring, chilling testament to the depths of human obsession, madness, and the macabre brilliance that can emerge when they intertwine. Rome, 1647. The city was a labyrinth of narrow alleyways, ancient stone walls, and hidden courtyards where shadows seemed to linger longer than light. In this city of power and piety, the Vatican loomed as both sanctuary and secret, a place where the sacred and sinister coexisted in uneasy tension. The monk, born into a humble family on the outskirts of the city, had shown early signs of exceptional artistic talent, a gift that drew the attention of church officials and patrons alike. He was admitted into the monastery at a young age, where discipline and devotion were meant to shape his mind and skill, but instead, the solitude and rigid structure nurtured a fascination with darkness, obsession, and the macabre. The convent became both his home and his prison, the walls echoing with prayers that masked the silent torment within him. His early works were praised for their precision and emotional depth, but behind the canvas, whispers of his strange behavior circulated among monks and attendants. He would disappear for hours into locked chambers, returning with eyes that gleamed with an intensity that frightened even his mentors. Conversations about saints in scripture were interrupted by his unsettling focus on human suffering, martyrdom, and the grotesque, foreshadowing the obsessions that would later define his work. In the monastery's library, he pored over texts not just of theology but of history's darkest moments, executions, bloodshed, and forgotten crimes that fascinated him more than the Holy Scriptures. The combination of isolation, intelligence, and exposure to these dark tales cultivated a mind capable of creating both beauty and horror. The monk's reputation grew quietly, a paradox of admiration and fear. Some monks revered his skill and vision, noting that his paintings captured the soul in ways that transcended mere technique, while others feared the obsession lurking behind every stroke. Sensing that his artistry was entwined with something far more dangerous than talent, his obsession with perfection pushed him to study anatomy, light, shadow, and composition with relentless fervor. Yet, it was not just mastery he sought. It was the power to evoke, to disturb, to imprint fear and fascination into those who beheld his work. He began experimenting with colors, textures, and mediums, testing the boundaries of traditional religious painting, seeking a method to transfer the intensity of his inner vision onto the canvas. These experiments, however, did not go unnoticed. Fellow monks murmured of strange noises, of shadows moving unnaturally, of a chill that seemed to follow him wherever he worked. Even the abbot, a man of stern faith, expressed concern, warning that obsession could lead one astray from God's path. But the monk's determination only deepened. It was during this period that he first contemplated the idea of combining the sacred Last Supper with a depiction of human suffering so intense it would leave viewers unsettled. A vision born from both devotion and obsession. The church's archives, full of old religious texts and accounts of martyrdom, became his reference, and he meticulously studied the anatomy of bodies, the expressions of anguish, and the interplay of light in moments of crisis. He was methodical yet consumed, a mind on the edge of brilliance and madness. By the time he reached his late 20s, his isolation was near absolute. Visitors to the monastery reported a presence, a palpable tension, a sense that the monk's chamber held a force beyond comprehension. Objects shifted inexplicably, shadows elongated unnaturally, and the air often felt heavy with silent whispers of the past. His focus on the Last Supper project intensified. He envisioned it not as a serene tableau of divinity, but as a vessel to capture the full spectrum of human suffering, betrayal, and doom, a representation that would forever mark his name in the annals of both fear and artistry. Scholars would later speculate that his work was influenced not only by religious iconography, but also by an intimate study of Rome's most macabre histories, plagues, executions, cults, and atrocities long buried by time. Every detail, from the tilt of a head to the tension in a hand, was calculated to evoke the psychological weight of despair. Yet he imbued each figure with a startling realism, a sense of motion and presence that unnerved viewers. His chamber, lined with sketches and notes, became a repository of obsession, a living map of his descent into the dark corners of the human mind, and a laboratory where beauty and horror collided in every brushstroke. Those who observed him working described a man simultaneously consumed and controlled by his vision, a monk who had surrendered fully to the power of his inner world, where reality and nightmare intertwined seamlessly. The monk's obsession deepened as the months passed. Each day spent in silent communion with his canvases and the shadowed corners of his chamber. The air was heavy with the scent of paint and something darker, a subtle tang of iron that hinted at the monk's increasingly intense experiments. He began to isolate himself almost entirely, speaking rarely, and when he did, his words carried the weight of someone unraveling at the edges of sanity. Visitors were warned against entering his chamber, though curiosity often overcame caution, and those who dared to look upon his preliminary sketches felt a shiver crawl down their spines. Each study of human anatomy, each attempt to capture expression and emotion, was infused with an intensity that blurred the line between reverence and horror. The city's whispers grew louder, tales of the condemned monk circulating beyond the monastery walls, stories of a man so consumed by vision that he appeared possessed, or perhaps chosen by forces beyond human comprehension. The monk, however, remained indifferent to gossip, entirely absorbed in a singular obsessive goal: to create a Last Supper so vivid, so horrifyingly lifelike that it would both enthrall and terrify, forcing viewers to confront the fragile and often grotesque nature of human existence. His days and nights merged into one unbroken cycle, the candlelight his only companion, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to move with their own intent, shaping the atmosphere of the chamber into something almost alive. The walls were covered with sketches, anatomical studies, and notes detailing the expressions of agony and ecstasy, betrayal, and despair. Each figure's posture, the twist of a wrist, the tilt of a head, was meticulously recorded and studied to achieve the perfect balance of horror and realism. The monk experimented with unconventional pigments, mixing oils with unusual compounds to create a depth and vibrancy in color that seemed to pulse under light, adding an almost unnatural vitality to his work. Observers reported that some sketches appeared to shift subtly when viewed from different angles, the eyes of the figures following the viewer in a manner that was deeply unsettling. His obsession was not limited to artistic technique. He studied psychology, human behavior, and the history of violence and suffering, incorporating these elements into his renderings. Tales of forgotten crimes, brutal executions, and condemned souls became integrated into his sketches, each element serving to heighten the sense of dread, the inescapable tension in every figure. The monk often spoke to himself while painting, murmuring prayers or fragments of scripture that seemed to intermingle with incantations of his own devising, a fusion of devotion and madness. His meals were sparse, his sleep irregular, as he poured every ounce of his being into the creation of the Last Supper. Even the other monks, accustomed to the rigors of monastery life, were unsettled by the intensity radiating from his chamber, reporting disturbances of sound and movement that defied logical explanation. Shadows deepened unnaturally, cold spots appeared without reason, and the faint whisper of distant voices seemed to echo from nowhere. Despite, or perhaps because of, these disturbances, the monk's skill reached new heights, each stroke of his brush conveying emotion, narrative, and a palpable tension that made the figures seem to breathe, to move, to exist almost beyond the confines of paint and canvas. Visitors who glimpsed completed sections reported an overwhelming sense of awe mixed with fear, describing the works as alive, haunted, and profoundly unsettling. The monk's devotion to his vision left him increasingly detached from reality, yet it was precisely this detachment that allowed him to explore extremes of human expression, suffering, and divine narrative that others dared not attempt. By the time the Last Supper painting was nearing its final form, the monk had become a figure of legend, a subject of fear and fascination, embodying the very macabre essence he sought to convey. His chamber remained untouched by ordinary time, a space where obsession, artistry, and the supernatural converged, and where each brushstroke carried the weight of centuries of human suffering and divine expectation. The stage was set for the creation of a work that would leave a permanent mark on history, a painting whose influence would ripple through time as both an artistic masterpiece and a vessel of haunting, enduring terror. As the days turned into weeks, the monk's obsession with his vision of the Last Supper intensified, consuming every waking moment and leaving no space for distraction. The monastery, normally a sanctuary of prayer and reflection, became a stage for his growing mania, the stone walls echoing with the quiet scratch of brushes and the whisper of his own murmured words. Candlelight flickered across sketches and studies, each depicting figures contorted in expressions of anguish, betrayal, and despair. The human form twisted to convey the extremity of suffering he sought to capture. He experimented with pigments, textures, and techniques, pushing the boundaries of conventional painting, searching for a way to convey not merely a scene, but an experience of dread and unease. The air in his chamber grew heavy, as if infused with the intensity of his obsession, and those few who glimpsed the work reported an almost tangible sense of the monk's inner torment radiating outward. Stories of the condemned monk spread quietly among the residents of Rome, whispered in narrow alleys and candlelit taverns, tales of a man whose devotion had taken a terrifying, obsessive turn. Visitors were warned to avoid the monastery, yet curiosity drew some too close, each encounter leaving an indelible impression of fear and fascination. His preparations for the painting involved meticulous study of anatomy, shadow, and light, alongside research into the histories of suffering, executions, and macabre events that had been largely forgotten by time. The monk's approach was methodical, yet there was a frenzied energy beneath the surface, a pulse of obsession that drove each stroke, each decision, and each calculated adjustment to the figure's expressions. Shadows in the chamber seemed to deepen unnaturally as he worked, moving in rhythm with his gestures, and the candlelight cast shapes that appeared almost animate, responding to the intensity of his focus. He became increasingly detached from ordinary life, rarely interacting with other monks or the outside world, consumed entirely by his singular goal of creating a Last Supper that would embody the totality of human suffering and the macabre interplay of divine observation and mortal despair. The walls of the chamber were covered with sketches, diagrams, and notes, an intricate map of his obsessive planning, each image a building block toward the final composition. He meticulously calculated every angle, the tilt of every head, the placement of every hand, and the play of shadows across each figure, striving to create a work that would be both compelling and terrifying in its realism. The monk's own physical health declined as his mental and emotional investment grew. Gaunt features, pale skin, and strained hands bore witness to the intensity of his obsession. Despite, or perhaps because of, these changes, his skill reached new heights, each figure imbued with a lifelike quality that unsettled viewers and brought the painting to an almost supernatural vividness. Those who saw preliminary sections of the work described feelings of unease, as if the figures themselves were aware of their audience, eyes that followed and hands that seemed to reach outward with a silent accusation or plea. The combination of historical research, anatomical precision, and psychological intensity created a unique effect, a fusion of artistry and terror that was unprecedented. The monk worked in near-complete isolation, speaking rarely, and when he did, his words were fragmented, alternating between scripture, prayer, and muttered commentary on the human condition. The chamber itself seemed to respond, shadows lengthening, sounds becoming more pronounced, and an almost imperceptible chill permeating the air, reinforcing the unnerving atmosphere surrounding the work. His focus on portraying betrayal and despair led him to study accounts of Judas and the reactions of other apostles, layering their expressions with tension, fear, and anticipation, capturing a moment of narrative climax frozen in paint. Each attempt to perfect a figure required hours, sometimes days, of adjustment, overlaying pigment after pigment, blending color and texture to achieve the lifelike and horrifying effect he envisioned. Visitors who observed through small openings reported an intensity in the air that was palpable, a sensation of being drawn into the narrative of suffering itself, and many turned away, shaken by the immersive nature of the preliminary work. The monk's obsession transformed the chamber into a living laboratory, a place where the boundaries between reality and imagination blurred, and the final painting became not merely an object but a vessel carrying the weight of his consumed mind, the history of human cruelty, and the visceral power of the macabre. He incorporated details from forgotten historical atrocities, combining imagery of ancient executions, plague, and martyrdom with the sacred figures of the Last Supper, creating a tapestry of human vulnerability, cruelty, and the inevitability of death. Every figure was studied repeatedly, adjusted and reworked to achieve maximum psychological effect, each line and shadow carefully calculated to evoke both awe and terror. By the time he had completed a substantial portion of the painting, the intensity of the room and the energy surrounding the work had reached an almost unbearable level, and it became clear that the monk's vision would not only challenge artistic conventions, but also unsettle any who approached it with curiosity or expectation. The build-up to the final composition was thus marked by obsession, meticulous planning, isolation, and the permeation of dread into the very atmosphere of the monastery, setting the stage for the horrifying completion of the condemned monk's vision, a masterpiece that would forever alter perceptions of artistry, devotion, and the capacity of human obsession. The monk's chamber became a world unto itself, a place removed from ordinary life where obsession and artistry collided with an almost tangible force. Every surface was covered with sketches, diagrams, and preliminary studies, each meticulously detailed to capture the subtle interplay of shadow, light, and human expression. He experimented with layers of paint to evoke depth, using techniques that blurred the line between realism and hallucination, creating figures that seemed poised on the edge of motion and stillness. The candlelight flickered constantly, casting dynamic shadows that interacted with his work, lending the chamber an atmosphere of both reverence and terror. His diet and sleep became secondary to the pursuit of perfection, his health deteriorating as he poured his entire being into the creation of the Last Supper. The monk's mind was a labyrinth of obsession, alternating between moments of inspiration and episodes of self-imposed torment, each influencing the depiction of the apostles and Christ with psychological intensity. The figures were no longer mere representations. They became extensions of his consciousness, vessels through which he expressed anguish, betrayal, and divine scrutiny. Accounts of his process describe a relentless devotion to detail, revising facial expressions, adjusting the placement of hands, and manipulating light and shadow to evoke maximum emotional response. The painting grew to encompass not just the sacred scene, but the collective weight of human suffering, historical atrocity, and moral ambiguity, blending spiritual themes with visceral depictions of mortality and fear. Observers who caught glimpses through narrow openings reported an uncanny vitality in the figures, a sense that the painted forms could perceive their presence and respond. The lines between the painted world and reality, blurring in a way that defied comprehension. The monk's studies of anatomy were rigorous, informed by both classical texts and first-hand observation, ensuring that every gesture, muscle tension, and facial expression was rendered with unsettling realism. He drew inspiration from historical records of executions, tortures, and forgotten tragedies, integrating these elements seamlessly into the composition, creating layers of meaning that went beyond conventional religious interpretation. The chamber itself seemed to amplify the intensity of his work, the very air thick with energy, charged with a presence that could be felt by those brave enough to enter. Each day the monk revisited sections of the canvas, making infinitesimal adjustments, blending colors, and deepening shadows to heighten the emotional and psychological impact. His obsession with precision and authenticity reached a point where the boundary between creation and possession became indistinguishable, as if the painting itself dictated his actions. In these moments, the monk seemed to merge with his work, his identity consumed entirely by the vision he sought to realize, a fusion of genius, madness, and the supernatural. Stories circulated in Rome of the condemned monk's peculiar habits, the sounds emanating from his chamber at odd hours, and the strange lights that flickered behind closed doors, all contributing to a growing mythos surrounding the creation of the Last Supper. Even those who never entered the chamber felt the ripple of dread in the city's air, a subtle but pervasive sense that something unnatural and profoundly disturbing was taking shape behind the monastery walls. As the painting approached its final stages, the monk's isolation became almost total. His existence narrowed to the interplay between brush, pigment, canvas, and the shadowed figures that inhabited both the room and his mind. His meticulous layering of pigments created depth and luminosity, enhancing the psychological tension and realism of each apostle, each hand gesture, each subtle glimmer of expression, and embedding within the painting a resonance of human emotion that was both compelling and terrifying. The final preparations were a culmination of months of study, obsession, and self-imposed suffering, as the monk pushed the boundaries of what art could achieve, creating a scene that would haunt not only viewers but also history itself. The build-up to the completion of the condemned monk's vision thus represents the apex of his obsession, a convergence of psychological intensity, artistic mastery, and an unrelenting pursuit of a depiction so profound, horrifying, and unforgettable that it defies the ordinary understanding of both sacred art and human capability, establishing a foundation for the climactic moment that would define his legacy and leave an indelible mark on Rome's history and the annals of the macabre. The culmination of the condemned monk's obsession arrived with a tension that permeated every corner of the chamber, the air thick with anticipation and dread. Each brushstroke, each color mixed with deliberate care, had led to this moment, the final convergence of vision, skill, and madness. Shadows seemed to lean closer, the candlelight trembling as if aware of the unfolding climax, casting elongated shapes that danced across the walls in accompaniment to the monk's fevered movements. The Last Supper, a scene previously existing only in sketches and fragmented studies, now emerged fully on the canvas, a terrifyingly vivid tableau imbued with life, death, and the weight of centuries of human suffering. Each apostle's face carried a unique expression, a complex mixture of fear, guilt, reverence, and dread, painted with such precision that viewers later described feeling watched, as if the figures themselves bore witness to their own creation and the torment of the monk. The monk's hands, trembling yet controlled, applied the final layers of pigment, blending blood-like hues into the flesh of the figures, enhancing the visceral effect of the scene. He worked in near silence, broken only by whispered prayers and the occasional muttered fragment of scripture, his mind fully consumed by the narrative unfolding under his brush. The room itself seemed to pulse with energy, a palpable manifestation of the obsession, suffering, and devotion that had guided him for months. Each detail, from the tilt of a head to the subtle shadow cast by a hand, was executed with painstaking precision, creating a depth that blurred the boundary between reality and representation. Observers who would later glimpse the completed work reported a chilling sense of presence, the figures appearing to move subtly, their eyes alive with emotion, their hands gesturing imperceptibly, a phenomenon that defied rational explanation. The monk's own reflection became intertwined with the painting. His shadow stretched across the canvas, merging with the figures, as if his identity and essence had been absorbed into the work itself. The intensity of the climax was heightened by the interplay of light and darkness, each element meticulously controlled to evoke maximum psychological impact, the subtle flicker of the candlelight amplifying expressions of agony and devotion alike. The narrative of betrayal and sacrifice, central to the Last Supper, was reimagined with macabre precision. The apostles frozen in moments of tension, fear, and anticipation, their gestures conveying a story beyond the canonical depiction, one infused with human fragility and the weight of moral consequence. The monk's obsession with capturing the absolute truth of human emotion manifested in almost supernatural detail, each brushstroke a conduit for the anguish, fear, and despair he had studied in history, scripture, and human observation. As the final sections were completed, an oppressive silence fell over the chamber, a stillness so profound that the slightest sound seemed amplified, the air charged with an almost tangible presence. The monk stepped back, eyes scanning the canvas, fully aware that the culmination of his labor was more than art. It was a confession, an exorcism, a revelation of his inner world projected outward in vivid, disturbing clarity. The final layer of paint, applied with almost ritualistic care, transformed the scene from a mere depiction to an immersive experience, capturing both divine narrative and the raw, horrifying intensity of human suffering. Those who later encountered the work described a sensation of being drawn into the painting, the figure's eyes following their gaze, hands reaching outward in gestures that felt eerily alive. Shadows within the chamber seemed to linger longer than natural, as if the walls themselves absorbed and radiated the energy of creation, a manifestation of the monk's obsessive devotion. The climax of this creation marked the apex of months of solitude, study, and psychological unraveling, a moment where genius and madness intersected with chilling consequence. The completed painting stood as both testament and warning, a macabre fusion of sacred narrative and human depravity, a visual echo of obsession made tangible, leaving behind a chamber steeped in tension, dread, and an unshakable sense of witnessing something beyond comprehension. In the final moments of the monk's labor, the air seemed to vibrate with the residual energy of his intense focus, the room charged with an aura of unease, anticipation, and reverence. The Last Supper, transformed into a tableau of terror and insight, now existed not merely as a work of art, but as a living testament to the condemned monk's obsession, a climactic point where months of study, isolation, and relentless devotion converged into an unforgettable and haunting masterpiece. The final moments of the painting consumed the monk entirely, his body tense with exhaustion yet driven by an unstoppable force, the culmination of months of meticulous planning, obsessive study, and relentless devotion. Shadows clung to every corner, moving with an almost sentient quality, bending toward the canvas as if drawn by the energy of creation itself. Candlelight flickered violently across the surface, illuminating the haunting expressions of the apostles, each face meticulously rendered to convey fear, guilt, betrayal, and the burden of mortal fragility. The monk's brush hovered over the final details, adjusting subtle shadows, refining muscle tension, perfecting the depth in the eyes, each movement deliberate and infused with the psychological intensity that defined his obsession. The air in the chamber was heavy, thick with a sense of dread and anticipation, charged with the energy of months of isolation and study. Every inch of the canvas seemed to pulse with life, the figure's hands and eyes conveying narratives that transcended simple representation, capturing the intricate interplay of human emotion, divine narrative, and macabre detail. Observers who would later witness fragments of the completed work described an overwhelming sensation of being drawn into the scene, the figures appearing to move imperceptibly, as if aware of the presence of an intruder or an observer, a phenomenon that defied natural explanation. The monk's own identity became inseparable from the painting. His shadow merged with the figures, his essence embedded into the pigments, creating a fusion of man and work that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He applied final layers of color, blending reds and deep umbers to evoke a visceral sense of suffering, betrayal, and the shadow of impending doom, ensuring that each element of the composition carried both emotional and psychological weight. The narrative tension within the scene reached its zenith, the apostles frozen in gestures of anticipation, dread, and silent accusation, Christ at the center a beacon of tragic inevitability, his presence both divine and hauntingly human. The culmination of the climax represented not merely the completion of a painting, but the manifestation of a mind utterly consumed by obsession, a testament to the interplay of genius, madness, and relentless devotion. The energy within the chamber seemed to hum, vibrating with the weight of creation and the intensity of psychological focus, as if the space itself had become a conduit for the monk's inner torment and visionary brilliance. Each brushstroke carried multiple layers of meaning, blending historical atrocity, forgotten executions, and macabre details with the sacred narrative, creating a composition that was as terrifying as it was compelling. The monk's meticulous attention to detail ensured that every figure, every shadow, every gesture contributed to the immersive, almost supernatural quality of the scene. The room was silent, save for the faint scratch of brush on canvas, each movement echoing like a heartbeat, a pulse of obsession that imbued the painting with a life beyond its material form. When the final stroke was applied, a profound stillness settled over the chamber, a silence so intense that it seemed the air itself held its breath in reverence and terror. The condemned monk stepped back, surveying the culmination of his months of labor, fully aware that the Last Supper before him was no longer a mere work of religious art, but a living testament to human obsession, suffering, and the boundaries of artistic expression. Shadows lingered unnaturally, the candlelight casting shapes that seemed almost animate, and the air vibrated with a residual energy that would linger long after the monk departed. The climax was complete, a macabre convergence of vision, madness, and technique, a tableau that would haunt all who encountered it, leaving an indelible mark on the city of Rome and on the history of sacred art. The chamber, now a repository of obsession and brilliance, seemed to retain the energy of creation, the air thick with a presence that could be felt but not touched, an aura of dread, reverence, and psychological intensity that underscored the terrifying genius of the condemned monk. With the final brushstroke, the monk's identity in the painting became one, a fusion of obsession and art that transcended mortal understanding, setting the stage for the aftermath that would haunt Rome for decades and forever mark the work as a pinnacle of macabre, tragic, and unforgettable mastery. Once the condemned monk completed his horrific vision, the immediate impact on the monastery and its surroundings was profound and unsettling. The chamber where the painting resided seemed to thrum with residual energy, a palpable tension that pressed against the walls and air, as if the act of creation had infused the space with the monk's obsessive intensity. Monks in attendance reported an unease that could not be explained, feelings of cold dread, and the sense that they were being observed by unseen eyes. News of the painting, though initially confined to whispers, began to permeate Rome, carried by travelers, curious clerics, and fearful servants who had glimpsed the preliminary sketches. They spoke of the vividness of the work, the unnerving realism of the apostles, and the sense that the figures might move or observe the viewer in silent accusation. Scholars and church officials debated the propriety of allowing such a work to remain accessible, torn between reverence for the artistic mastery and fear of the psychological influence it exerted. The painting's portrayal of human suffering, betrayal, and divine narrative challenged conventional notions of sacred art, embedding itself as both a masterpiece and a curse. The monk himself became an enigmatic figure, vanishing from public view, his existence entwined with the painting, leaving only rumors and fragments of testimony regarding his behavior and final days. Those who had witnessed him at work described a man transformed, a figure consumed entirely by his vision, his body gaunt, his hands trembling, yet guided by an unrelenting, terrifying precision. The monastery struggled to maintain normality, though the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. Novices reported strange noises, flickering lights, and whispers that seemed to emanate from the chamber, phenomena that were dismissed as superstition, but which instilled unease throughout the religious community. The painting itself became a focal point of fascination and fear, attracting a select few who dared approach, only to experience the psychological weight of the monk's obsession. Visitors spoke of the overwhelming sense of presence, the impression that the figure's eyes followed them, hands gesturing with intent, and an oppressive energy that seemed to cling to their minds long after leaving the room. The aftermath extended beyond mere psychological effects. The monastery began recording accounts of these experiences, noting the increasing frequency of reports describing intense emotional reactions, physical sensations of pressure or cold, and even faint whispers perceived in moments of silence. Some theorists suggested that the painting had absorbed elements of the monk's mind, a lingering imprint of his obsession and mania that radiated outward, influencing all who approached. The city of Rome itself seemed subtly affected, the tale of the condemned monk and his blood-infused Last Supper spreading among those curious enough to seek out the story. It became a cautionary tale, whispered in fear and fascination, warning of the destructive potential of obsession when intertwined with genius and devotion. Scholars of art and theology debated the implications, noting the unprecedented psychological and emotional impact of the work, while attempting to rationalize its effects through historical, spiritual, and scientific frameworks. Visitors reported that even brief exposure could evoke feelings of terror, awe, and an inexplicable connection to human suffering, a testament to the monk's ability to channel his own torment into a visual language that transcended ordinary comprehension. Accounts recorded by the monastery detailed attempts to cleanse or neutralize the energy of the painting, all unsuccessful, reinforcing the belief that the work itself had become a vessel of the monk's obsession and psychological imprint. Over time, the aftermath extended into lore, as stories of unexplained phenomena, hauntings, and psychological disturbances circulated in scholarly circles and among locals alike. The painting, preserved in secret, remained a subject of intrigue and dread, a permanent reminder of the monk's descent into obsession and the terrifying heights of his artistic vision. Even the most rational observers admitted that the work exerted a presence, a force that could not be ignored, leaving the viewer unsettled, disturbed, and haunted by the vivid depiction of suffering and betrayal. The condemned monk's disappearance only amplified the aura of mystery and dread, his existence entwined with the painting, an enduring enigma that scholars, clerics, and citizens alike struggled to understand. The aftermath of his creation transformed the monastery into a nexus of fear and fascination, the painting a living testament to the consequences of obsessive devotion, the intertwining of genius and madness, and the enduring power of human creativity, even when steeped in darkness. The city of Rome continued to carry whispers of the work, tales passed down through generations, influencing perceptions of sacred art, human obsession, and the thin line separating brilliance from depravity. The monk's chamber, left untouched, remained a silent witness, a shrine to obsession, and the culmination of years of meticulous, horrifying labor. The lingering presence of the condemned monk's painting extended far beyond the monastery, its influence seeping into the minds and hearts of all who encountered its harrowing realism. Visitors reported an oppressive weight upon entering the chamber, a sense of suffocation intertwined with awe, as though the painted apostles and Christ were aware of their scrutiny. Scholars who attempted to study the work objectively found themselves emotionally unsettled, some unable to remain in the room for more than a few minutes, describing a psychological impact that seemed to bypass reason and directly affect the mind and spirit. The monk's meticulous blending of pigment, anatomical precision, and psychological intensity created a scene that transcended ordinary artistry, a tableau of human suffering so vivid and haunting that viewers struggled to reconcile the sacred narrative with the macabre reality before them. Accounts from clerics and lay observers alike spoke of whispers in moments of silence, subtle movements in the painted figures, and a chilling sense of observation that persisted even after leaving the chamber. The painting's notoriety grew, quietly, not through public display but through whispered accounts and fragmented reports, creating an aura of legend around both the work and its creator. The condemned monk, never seen again, became inseparable from the painting in collective memory, his identity and obsession forever tied to the horrifying brilliance of his vision. Attempts to understand or explain the effects of the painting drew on theology, psychology, and early theories of perception, but none could fully account for the intense emotional responses it elicited. Visitors spoke of unease, nausea, and deep sorrow, often accompanied by vivid dreams or intrusive thoughts relating to the figures and events depicted. Some attributed these reactions to the monk's mental state, suggesting that the intensity of his obsession had somehow transferred into the work itself, embedding a fragment of his consciousness within the canvas. Others viewed it as divine or supernatural influence, interpreting the painting as a conduit through which human suffering and divine observation intersected, a warning or lesson encoded in pigment and blood. The monastery struggled to contain the fascination and fear surrounding the work, restricting access to the chamber and maintaining careful records of all interactions with the painting, though even these measures did little to diminish the pervasive aura of dread. Generations of monks, scholars, and visitors noted the chamber's unchanging atmosphere, the oppressive energy, and the subtle phenomena that defied explanation, reinforcing the legend of the condemned monk and the Last Supper in blood. Over time, the painting became an object of both reverence and fear, its existence a reminder of the fragile boundary between genius and madness, devotion and obsession, art and horror. Each retelling of the story added layers to its macabre legacy, blending historical accounts, folklore, and personal testimony into a chilling narrative of human obsession and the enduring power of a singular vision. The aftermath extended even further as rumors reached neighboring cities and scholars who spoke of the painting in hushed tones, careful not to awaken forces beyond their comprehension. The psychological impact of the work persisted, with individuals describing lingering sensations of eyes following them, hands gesturing imperceptibly, and a pervasive unease that could not be explained rationally. The chamber remained untouched. For decades, a shrine to the monk's obsessive brilliance, the painting preserved in secrecy, yet continuing to radiate the intensity of its creator's mind. The enduring legacy of the condemned monk's work shaped both artistic and psychological discourse, influencing future generations' understanding of the connection between obsession, creativity, and human perception. The painting's influence on Rome was subtle yet undeniable, its presence felt in whispers, rumors, and the collective memory of those who had experienced even the faintest glimpse. Even centuries later, the aftermath of the creation continues to inspire a mix of fascination, terror, and scholarly inquiry, a testament to the enduring impact of obsessive devotion channeled through extraordinary talent. The chamber, still, silent, and heavy with the weight of the monk's creation, stands as a memorial to human obsession, the power of artistic mastery, and the chilling intersection of genius and madness, leaving behind a legacy as haunting as the painting itself, a work that will forever echo through history as a testament to the condemned monk's dark brilliance and the unforgettable horror of his vision. Despite the passage of time, the condemned monk's painting remained shrouded in mystery, its presence both feared and revered. Scholars, clerics, and curious visitors alike struggled to understand the psychological and spiritual impact it exerted. Reports of unshakable unease and inexplicable phenomena continuing to surface. The painting was said to retain a part of the monk's obsessive mind, a residue of his years of isolation and study, embedding within the canvas a haunting consciousness that extended beyond the material pigments. Those who observed the work often described feelings of being watched, a subtle sense of motion in the figures, and whispers that seemed to emanate from empty spaces, phenomena that defied rational explanation. Attempts to document or analyze these occurrences yielded incomplete results, leaving the work's true nature elusive and adding to its legend. Historical records were scarce, deliberately vague or contradictory, reflecting both fear and reverence for the monk and his creation. Scholars debated the extent to which the psychological impact was intentional, a manifestation of the monk's genius, or an unforeseen consequence of his obsessive methods. Some believed that the painting had been consecrated unintentionally with the intensity of his devotion, blending sacred imagery with macabre obsession, creating a work that challenged the very nature of perception and spiritual experience. The room itself was considered an extension of the work, the chamber's atmosphere charged with an almost palpable energy, the air thick with tension that seemed to influence all who entered. Attempts to move or display the painting in other locations often failed, with accounts of subtle changes in the room's temperature, flickering lights and shadows that behaved unnaturally, reinforcing the belief that the painting exerted influence beyond the visual. Stories circulated of scholars experiencing vivid dreams, intrusive thoughts, or an overwhelming sense of moral and psychological scrutiny after even brief exposure, indicating that the monk's obsession had transcended his own existence, embedding a fragment of his consciousness within the work itself. Some speculated that the blood-infused pigments carried latent symbolic power, a psychological imprint that interacted with the minds of observers, heightening their sense of dread and empathy simultaneously. The mystery deepened as later generations attempted to trace the monk's origins and methods, uncovering fragments of diaries, letters, and monastery records that hinted at a life consumed by obsession, brilliance, and darkness. Even with these records, the exact techniques, motivations, and mental state of the monk remained enigmatic, a puzzle whose pieces suggested both extraordinary talent and profound psychological disturbance. Local legends described the painting as cursed, a vessel of lingering energy that could influence thoughts and emotions, creating a narrative that blended historical fact, folklore, and the unexplained. Visitors' testimonies reinforced this perception, often noting that the figure's expression seemed to shift subtly, a phenomenon interpreted as the work's living memory, or the monk's presence enduring within the canvas. The city of Rome itself became an indirect participant in the mystery, the tale of the condemned monk circulating among artists, theologians, and citizens, influencing attitudes toward art, obsession, and the limits of human creativity. Attempts to study the painting scientifically were limited, early observers citing inexplicable effects on vision, cognition, and emotion, leading many to avoid prolonged exposure. Over time, the mystery became integral to the painting's identity. The legend and the work intertwined, each reinforcing the other, and the monk's name became synonymous with brilliance, obsession, and the unsettling intersection of genius and horror. The painting's enduring influence challenged viewers to confront both the beauty and terror of human experience, morality and suffering, presenting an unsettling paradox where admiration and fear existed simultaneously. The mystery deepened further with the absence of definitive records regarding the monk's fate, his disappearance leaving only his work as evidence of his existence, obsession, and talent. The chamber, preserved in secrecy, retained the echoes of his presence, the atmosphere charged with the lingering tension and psychological weight of the creation, amplifying the enigmatic quality of the painting itself. Observers often reported a visceral response, an immediate awareness that the work contained more than paint and canvas, that it held fragments of history, obsession, and human suffering in a form both tangible and intangible. Scholars attempted to interpret the moral and theological implications, yet none could fully reconcile the painting's spiritual narrative with its macabre intensity, leaving the work suspended between reverence and fear, reality and legend. The mystery of the condemned monk and his Last Supper continues to challenge perceptions, its psychological, spiritual, and artistic dimensions remaining subjects of fascination, inquiry, and unease for all who encounter the haunting legacy of his obsession. The deeper the observers looked into the condemned monk's painting, the more the mystery seemed to expand, revealing layers of meaning and psychological intensity that were impossible to quantify. Each apostle's expression, each shadow, and each meticulously rendered detail carried with it a weight that went beyond simple observation, invoking an almost supernatural awareness of human frailty, betrayal, and moral ambiguity. Scholars and clerics noted that repeated exposure to the work produced varying emotional reactions, sometimes calm and contemplative, other times overwhelming fear or sorrow, suggesting an active, shifting presence within the painting itself. Attempts to replicate or explain the phenomenon scientifically were inconclusive. Pigments, techniques, and composition could be studied, yet none could account for the pervasive sense of sentience, observation, or the lingering energy reported by those in the chamber. Local folklore intertwined with historical accounts, creating a narrative in which the monk's obsession and psychological imprint became inseparable from the artwork, the painting serving as a vessel for the unresolved tension between divine narrative and human cruelty. Some theorized that the monk had unconsciously imbued the canvas with his consciousness through obsessive devotion, creating a living reflection of his mind that would persist beyond his physical existence. This theory gained traction as multiple witnesses independently reported subtle but consistent phenomena: shifting shadows, the impression of motion in the figures, whispers during silence, and an uncanny sensation of judgment or observation. Over the decades, the painting became a subject of secrecy, revered and feared in equal measure, a hidden treasure that challenged the boundaries of understanding in art, psychology, and spirituality. The monk's disappearance only added to the enigma, leaving behind a work that carried his presence, intention, and madness without a clear explanation for its enduring impact. The mystery was further compounded by the lack of corroborating documentation about the painting's creation, with only fragments of notes, sketches, and third-hand accounts available, each offering tantalizing hints yet failing to fully illuminate the scope of the monk's obsession and technique. Attempts to contextualize the painting within the broader history of sacred art revealed its unprecedented fusion of religious narrative, macabre imagery, and psychological intensity, a combination that both fascinated and terrified. The chamber where the work resided became an integral part of the mystery, its atmosphere charged with an energy that seemed to originate from the painting itself, amplifying the psychological effects reported by visitors. Witnesses often spoke of a sense of temporal distortion, hours feeling like minutes or vice versa, as though the space contained a lingering fragment of the monk's perception of time, a reflection of his obsessive isolation and relentless focus. Scholars and clerics debated whether the painting's psychological effects were intentional, a product of divine inspiration, or an unintended consequence of the monk's extreme devotion. Yet no consensus was reached, the enigma remaining impenetrable. The mystery also influenced artistic thought, inspiring subsequent generations to explore the intersection of obsession, technique, and emotional impact, though none could replicate the intensity or haunting presence of the original work. Even in modern analysis, reports of subtle changes in the painting's appearance persisted, witnesses claiming shifts in expression, shadow, or posture, reinforcing the belief that the work was alive in some inexplicable way. The city of Rome retained its awareness of the painting through whispered legends, scholarly correspondence, and careful records. The story of the condemned monk and his Last Supper in blood persisting as both historical account and cautionary tale. This duality of reverence and fear encapsulated the enduring mystery, the painting existing as a bridge between observable reality and the unknown, challenging all who encountered it to confront the boundaries of human perception, devotion, and the intersection of genius and madness. Over time, the work's influence seeped beyond the monastery, inspiring both awe and terror in those who heard of it, creating a psychological legacy that transcended physical presence, allowing the monk's obsessive vision to persist through generations. The mystery was further amplified by contradictory accounts of the monk's final days, some claiming he disappeared into the shadows of the monastery, others suggesting his spirit became entwined with the painting, immortalizing his obsessive brilliance and tragic descent. Visitors often noted the oppressive and enigmatic atmosphere, leaving the chamber with lingering sensations of fear, reverence, and the unsettling awareness of being in proximity to a work that carried the essence of its creator's mind. The painting became a study in obsession, the enduring power of art, and the psychological consequences of extreme devotion, a masterpiece whose influence extended beyond the visual to the metaphysical, leaving observers to question the limits of human creativity and the boundaries between genius and madness. Even centuries later, the mystery of the condemned monk and his painting endures, the psychological, spiritual, and historical dimensions intertwining to create a work that remains both terrifying and compelling, a haunting testament to the enduring power of obsessive human devotion and the macabre brilliance that can emerge when genius teeters on the edge of madness. The final chapter of the condemned monk's life and work leaves an indelible mark on history, a haunting reflection on obsession, devotion, and the limits of human endurance. The monastery, once a place of sacred routine, had become a vessel of intense psychological energy, the chamber where the painting resided charged with a presence that could not be ignored. Visitors reported an overwhelming sensation of awe mixed with fear, as though standing before a force greater than art itself, a convergence of genius and madness immortalized on canvas. Scholars and clerics attempted to interpret the work, to find reason in the macabre intensity of the figures, the blood-infused pigments, and the meticulous rendering of suffering and betrayal. Yet every analysis seemed to fall short, capturing only fragments of the painting's true psychological and spiritual impact. The monk's disappearance added to the haunting narrative, his final days shrouded in uncertainty, leaving the painting as the sole testament to his genius, his obsession, and the darkness that consumed him. Accounts suggest that he vanished into the shadows of the monastery, never to be seen again, leaving behind a work that embodied both his brilliance and his descent into isolation and mania. The painting's influence continued to ripple outward, affecting those who encountered it, leaving a lasting psychological imprint that blurred the lines between observer and creation, reality and imagination. The apostle's expressions, the play of shadows, and the intricate details combined to evoke feelings of dread, sorrow, and moral reflection, a powerful reminder of the human capacity for both devotion and darkness. Over time, the monastery became a place of legend, its walls echoing with the memory of the monk's obsessive labor, the Last Supper in blood standing as a symbol of unrelenting focus and the potential consequences of absolute obsession. Visitors often described leaving the chamber with a lingering sense of unease, their perceptions altered, their thoughts consumed by the weight of the figure's gazes and the intensity of the composition. The painting's preservation became a matter of careful management, the work guarded and studied in secrecy, a testament to both reverence for the artistry and fear of its psychological influence. Stories of the monk's methods, his obsessive devotion, and the peculiar energy surrounding the painting persisted, blending historical accounts, first-hand testimony, and legend into a narrative that continues to captivate and unsettle. Scholars debated the ethical and spiritual implications, questioning the intersection of genius, obsession, and morality, as well as the potential consequences of creating art so powerful that it could influence the minds and emotions of its observers. The ending reflects on the lasting impact of the condemned monk's vision, the profound psychological resonance of the painting, and the enduring enigma surrounding its creation and preservation. Some theorists suggested that the painting's influence might extend beyond the physical, a metaphysical presence that carried the essence of the monk's mind and obsession, an enduring imprint that transcended time and space. Others viewed it as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers inherent in absolute devotion when entwined with isolation, genius, and the pursuit of perfection. The chamber itself remained a focal point, its atmosphere heavy with residual energy, the weight of obsession, and the haunting quality of the painting, a silent witness to the monk's genius and madness. Over centuries, the story of the condemned monk and his Last Supper in blood has been passed down, blending historical fact, folklore, and speculation, creating a multi-layered narrative that continues to provoke, disturb, and fascinate. The painting embodies the convergence of artistic mastery, psychological intensity, and the macabre, capturing a moment in time when human obsession achieved both brilliance and horror, leaving a legacy that endures in both memory and influence. The ending contemplates the fragile boundary between genius and madness, devotion and destruction, reality and perception, as embodied in the monk's work, and the psychological weight it continues to exert. Observers are left to grapple with the moral, spiritual, and emotional implications, the painting serving as a mirror to human frailty, ambition, and the extremes of obsessive focus. Even today, the legacy of the condemned monk challenges the way art is perceived, understood, and experienced, emphasizing the enduring power of obsessive human creation and the profound, sometimes terrifying impact it can have on both individuals and communities. The chamber, preserved and guarded, remains a shrine to his obsession, the Last Supper in blood, standing as a testament to the enduring consequences of relentless pursuit, the intersection of talent and madness, and the haunting presence of genius that refuses to fade. The conclusion of his life and work reflects on the permanence of artistic legacy, the psychological weight of human obsession, and the haunting reminder that brilliance and darkness often coexist in the most extraordinary creations. The final moments of reflection on the condemned monk's work and life leave a lingering sense of awe, fear, and melancholic admiration. The painting, preserved in its chamber, serves as a permanent testament to a man consumed by genius and obsession, a visual manifestation of the extremes of human focus and psychological intensity. Visitors continue to report subtle, inexplicable phenomena, the sensation of being watched, slight shifts in the painted figures, whispers in moments of silence, and a pervasive atmosphere of dread that seems inseparable from the canvas. The monk's disappearance adds to the haunting resonance of the work, leaving the painting as both his voice and his legacy, a chilling reminder of the power of obsession when fused with artistic talent. Scholars debate whether the effects are purely psychological or if some supernatural force lingers within the pigments, yet no consensus is reached, the mystery enhancing the work's legendary status. The apostle's expressions remain frozen in time, yet observers often sense nuanced changes, subtle gestures, or an awareness that defies rational explanation, a testament to the meticulous attention and obsessive detail invested by the monk over months of relentless labor. Over centuries, the painting has inspired fascination and trepidation, influencing generations of artists, theologians, and psychologists seeking to understand the intersection of human creativity, obsession, and the macabre. The monk's methodical study of anatomy, historical atrocity, and emotional intensity is reflected in every stroke, producing a work that transcends conventional artistic boundaries and enters the realm of psychological experience. The chamber itself remains a focal point of tension, its walls absorbing and radiating the monk's obsessive energy, creating a space that is simultaneously sacred, terrifying, and psychologically potent. Visitors often describe physical sensations, a chill in the air, a tightening of the chest, or a sense of moral and emotional scrutiny emanating from the painting, suggesting that the monk's devotion imprinted an enduring resonance into the very fabric of the work. The ending also contemplates the ethical and philosophical implications of such obsessive creation. A man so devoted to his vision that he disappears into it, leaving behind a work capable of influencing generations and challenging perceptions of reality, morality, and human limitation. The painting embodies the duality of human experience, merging beauty and horror, genius and madness, spirituality and macabre, a haunting reflection of the monk's mind and the intensity of his pursuit. Scholars attempting to study or replicate the effects invariably fall short, as the original work encapsulates a unique convergence of psychological, spiritual, and artistic forces that cannot be duplicated, only observed and experienced. Local legends continue to describe the chamber as a site of subtle supernatural influence, reinforcing the painting's reputation as both masterpiece and cautionary artifact, a reminder of the consequences of obsessive devotion. Even modern psychological analysis acknowledges the profound and unsettling effects the painting can have on perception, mood, and emotional state, though the precise mechanisms remain elusive. Adding to the enduring enigma, the monk's absence ensures that the painting is the sole representative of his genius and torment, a singular creation that continues to speak across centuries, challenging viewers to confront human vulnerability, the boundaries of creativity, and the profound effects of obsessive focus. The Last Supper in Blood transcends conventional understanding, embodying the cumulative weight of the monk's study, isolation and obsessive drive, creating an immersive, haunting experience that merges historical, spiritual, and macabre dimensions. The chamber's atmosphere, heavy with residual energy, amplifies every detail, ensuring that the viewer's experience is inseparable from the environment. The psychological and emotional impact intertwined with physical presence. The monk's vision, fully realized in the final work, serves as a testament to the enduring consequences of extreme devotion, the transformative potential of obsession, and the haunting resonance of genius pursued to its absolute limits. The ending leaves a lasting reflection on the interplay between brilliance and darkness, creativity and psychological intensity, and the profound, often unsettling, impact a single human life can exert through obsessive dedication. The Last Supper in Blood remains an artifact of obsession, a vessel of the monk's mind and soul, a perpetual reminder that genius and madness often coexist inextricably, and that the legacy of human creativity can endure in ways that continue to unsettle, fascinate, and inspire awe long after its creator has vanished. The chamber, painting, and legend together form an inseparable narrative, ensuring that the condemned monk's influence persists across centuries. A haunting, unforgettable testament to the extremity of human devotion and the chilling heights of artistic achievement.